Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Reinsurance Podcast. I am your co-host, Jared Lee.
And I'm Ben Rose.
And this is a Reinsurance Podcast off tour. Welcome back to London, sir.
Thank you very much. And you're not just welcoming me, Jared.
I am not. No, I'm also welcoming the infamous Paul Gadsby. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. I feel like a true millennial.
Exactly. This is the podcast game. You've got the mic all set up, ready to go.
You're just missing your oat coffee, or your oat mocha in my case.
Yeah.
Very modern.
Very good.
But no, the reason we wanted to get you on the show, Paul, was because, I don't know if everyone knows this, but you have pretty much since our starting Supercede been our specialist consultant on all things Ceded Re, because Jared obviously came from a broking background, I came from an underwriting background, and you had this long and illustrious career. Well, you told me not to call it illustrious, but this fabulous career with Ace, now Chubb, buying reinsurance, and have been able to give us, I think, a really important emphasis throughout on what matters most. So I'm hoping we can spend a lot of time talking about that today on this episode.
Yeah. Do you want to do a quick whistle-stop tour of your career in the industry?
Well, I think, as Ben said, it's long. It's been long. I'm not so sure about the illustrious, but I started. I didn't know, like many people I've heard previously on the podcast, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I thought initially I wanted to follow my father into the legal profession, and I, in fact, embarked on a law degree initially after leaving school. But I decided it wasn't for me. I just thought I couldn't remember all the case laws and all that studying. I wasn't a huge academic at school. I got my O-levels and my A-levels, and I enjoyed it. But I moved on, and I decided I went and apologized to my father. And he basically said, well, you must, that's great, but I'm not going to keep you.
Yeah.
You've got to go and get a job. And he introduced me to a wonderful man who he knew very well, and a guy called Derek Marchant, who was a aviation broker at a company called Alexander Howden, which is now part of the Aon Empire.
Yeah.
And I came up and met him, and he took me around Lloyd's, took me into the captain's room. This is the old Lloyd's, the 58 building, which is now where the Willis Empire, the Willis building is situated.
Yeah.
And showed me around and told me about the history of Lloyd's, which was fascinating, and then took me into the room. And the sheer energy and the excitement of that room just galvanized my enthusiasm. Yeah. And as I say, I kind of fell into it, and I'm very pleased I have, because it's been a fascinating career.
Yeah. I wonder how many reinsurance careers start with apologizing to one's father for not choosing the career path that they had set out with, but then followed with sort of this excitement of seeing the buzz of the industry. Even now, we talk to grads and under 35s and things in the industry, and that first step into the Lloyd's building, as antiquated as it still is at times, there's still this energy that's palpable, and it's hard to sort of ignore the excitement that you get, especially now. And I think when we looked at coming out of the pandemic, returning to a bit of that buzz and that excitement. But you went from there and started from on the broking side a little bit, and then you transitioned into the reinsurance side, the ceding side?
Yeah, I suppose the majority of my career I started in the reinsurance broking side with a company initially called Wigan Poland. They were bought out by Sedgwick, and I ended up at E.W. Payne, which was the reinsurance arm of Sedgwick, which is a British company. They were bought out by Marsh McClellan, and I spent a time at Guy Carpenter as well. And so I suppose when I look back, about 25 years of my time was spent on the reinsurance broking side. And then I got offered a job to join the Ceded Re team at Ace in London, just after the World Trade Center loss in 2001. And I was there for about 13 years, buying reinsurance and working with two really very professional buyers themselves, Nicholas Michaelides and Neil Bennett. And I suppose when I look back, I think that was the point in time where I learnt the most about the industry, because up until that time, I'd been very much pigeonholed as a property cat and property risk broker. But when I joined the Ceded Re team at at ACE, the whole gambit of multi-line reinsurances opened up in front of me. And yeah, I was placing casualty programs and political risk programs, surety programs, energy. And that was very exciting. You were dealing with stakeholders within ACE, the line managers and the reinsurance brokers that helped us place those programs, as well as the reinsurers themselves.
So when you were in the industry, what was it like sort of transitioning from the sort of pre-92 world to sort of the post-Hurricane Andrew 92 world? What was that experience like for you?
I remember specifically the hard market in 92. I wasn't a ceded rebuy at that stage. That was a very interesting time because we'd had a whole series of catastrophe losses prior to 92. 92 was famous for Hurricane Andrew, but prior to that we had 2 1 in 100-year events with 87J and 90A in the UK, these 2 hurricanes that did enormous damage in the UK. And then we had Hurricane Andrew, and the market really did become very difficult. But at that time, and in fact, yeah, at that time, a number of reinsurers and new capital came into the market. About 8 of them, 8 seriously capitalized companies came into the Bermuda market. And I spent, my chairman at the time, Cedric, was David Rowland, went on to be chairman of Lloyd's, and Sax Riley was the CEO. And they both decided that this was a very interesting play in Bermuda, and that they needed someone to manage, what was going on the island. So I drew the lucky straw, and they sent me out there for a period, and it was a fascinating time. I remember going to Ren's office, Ren Re's office, and there were literally just one boardroom table, lots of boxes of paper, a fax machine, and these guys were writing property cat. And that my role was really to try and work out, what they wanted to see from us as a broker. I was working at EW Payne. The one thing they didn't want was retro. They wanted to write the big sort of composite accounts in the UK and the US, and they were very successful, as you know, doing that. And then, of course, they've become, in their own right, huge operations, writing multi-line insurance and reinsurance to this day. But it started off as a very small, focused property cat.
Yeah. It's certainly something that's come up in a lot of our recent conversations, including during the Reinsurance podcast on tour. But it's been, I think, quite a challenge for buyers, I guess, this time around, with Hurricane Ian being this generation's Hurricane Andrew, perhaps, where that class of 92, 93 hasn't really emerged for 22, 23. We're sat really, it feels, scraping the barrel for capacity, with retro capacity where it is coming in very late, meaning the reinsurers don't know how much capacity they've got to deploy, meaning again that the whole market's sort of stalled, waiting for something to fill the gap, and that hasn't really happened. I think that has put a lot of pressure on ceded re teams. We've been hearing that. Can you imagine what it would be like for you now if you went to all of your reinsurance partners and the door was closed? Like, what would you be reaching out to try and fix that if you were still in your buyer role and faced with a market like the one today?
Well, certainly when I look back at my time at ACE, which was then a very big buyer of reinsurance, and now as Chubb is probably an even bigger buyer of reinsurance, I suppose the message I'd be conveying to our reinsurers is, we've built and developed, a partnership, a relationship over many, many years, and you've supported us across multiple lines of business. We're ceding hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of premium into the market, and we would like you to recognize that and and to make sure that you step up to the plate and provide us with the capacity and the strength of your balance sheet going forward. We recognize, we see where you are and where the market is. But yeah, look, it's about relationships. It's long-term relationships, a long-term business. We don't want any knee-jerk reactions. But yeah, I'd say that.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of that in the current climate, right? Which it's really highlighting the importance of relationships. It's really showcasing the fact that reinsurers and cedents who manage the soft market as partners better, right? Giving a little bit when they could based on the market conditions are sort of being advantaged by that sort of same relationship going the other direction, right? Reinsurers being willing to give capacity, and it's more constrained now because of the supply constraint for reinsurers, but those relationships being sort of leveraged at the forefront of the deals that are getting done. And I think you're right, setting out the fact that you highlight the length and quality of that relationship over time puts you in a better position when market conditions shift to really make the most of it, right?
Yeah, I agree.
With recognition that the market's shifting and the reinsurers are going to get a bit more this time around, and that's fine too, right?
Yeah, and certainly, there'll be a lot of people within Chubb and looking at the overall risk management position and how it affects their capital. And they will be, thinking, what can we do? What can we do? There will be alternatives. There will be, companies can go out and raise capital. They can. The ILS market's probably not there so much, but generally speaking, we wanted to keep. When I was there, I can't speak for now, but we wanted things to be fairly simple.
Mm-hmm.
We want to buy certain levels of cover, protecting us up to our 1 in 250-year event, and recognizing the relationship we have over the entirety of our book of business. The CAT obviously is very important. It's protecting the financial well-being of the business. Reinsurance is also protecting the earnings volatility within the business. There's so much emphasis now on CEOs of companies like Chubb and AIG to grow, and sometimes it's not suitable. Growth is not suitable. We live in a notoriously cyclical business. We work in a notoriously cyclical business, and you've got to balance that, disciplined underwriting against we want you to support us when times get tough.
I think from some conversations we've had in the past, there's almost this, I think you said a moment ago, actually, it feels like there's been a bit of a knee-jerk reaction in the market at the moment. And actually, that disappoints me a little bit as a reinsurance industry commentator and observer, that if we are trying to achieve a mutual hedge where earnings volatility is reduced and business commitments can be made to our respective clients over the long term, and we're not expecting a sudden hike of, what we're saying, 50% plus in some cases, in terms of how much it costs us to be able to support the portfolios we want to operate consistently year on year. It feels like somewhere something's going wrong, and I think it should be a two-way promise that the cedents won't provide any nasty surprises to their reinsurers if in exchange the reinsurers don't provide any nasty surprises to the cedent. And what worries me at the heart of all this is that over a couple of decades of like a very soft market cycle that's just been sustained and continued down and down and down and down, there hasn't really been any pressure on cedents because of buyer power, broker power, to really be very transparent about their business, to really talk very much about their business. They can almost, sleepwalk into meetings with reinsurers, desperate to get onto panels, regardless of what their business actually looks like. And it's only now, very suddenly, to me at least, it feels like there's been this step change where actually cedents are under the microscope, and cedents are really having to prove that, they are still attractive, desirable risks to be underwritten by the reinsurance and retro markets. And I feel like that could have all been avoided if there'd been a level of transparency, if there'd been lots more partnership and interaction and data sharing that meant that, this wasn't a sudden thing that happened. This was part of the 1 in 20s that had been calculated, the 1 in 100s that had been calculated. Because yes, there have been quite a few big challenges we've seen economically over the last few years. We've seen pandemics, we've seen wars and so on. But the thing people are pointing to the most is climate change. And it's not as if climate change this year has suddenly emerged very specifically. Climate change was as complained about last year as it is this year. I think perhaps there's been a lag in that reaching people's agendas, but suddenly it's come to the front of reinsurers' models, and they've said, well, because this 1 in whatever happened this year, actually we need to recalibrate all of our models completely. But I feel like if there was that stronger sense of partnership and trust between buyers and brokers and reinsurers, maybe that could have been avoided. But be interested to get your thoughts on how you as a buyer can build trust, I guess, with your reinsurers, because that feels like the most important thing right now if you're going to survive knee-jerk market responses where the reinsurers feel they'd be missing out if they didn't join the frenzy to push up prices and avoid quoting.
Yes, I think one of the things that was drummed home to me when I was at ACE was the importance of managing expectations, and the fact that the information, the disclosure of correct, appropriate information is absolutely vital. So we wanted our reinsurers to have all access to the information, because ultimately it's a promise to pay in the event of loss, a reinsurance contract, a bit like an insurance contract. And when that loss happens, you want to be assured that those partners, those reinsurers, will pay quickly and without fuss. And the only times they're likely to withhold or prevaricate on paying a claim is if they weren't aware or weren't expecting a loss from that, whatever it might have been. So yes, the transparency of information was always very, very important. And it still is very important. But of course, the data now that we talk about, in the old days, we just talked about an information pack. Now we talk about a data pack. And that data pack forms part of the duty of disclosure. And that duty of disclosure is very important because it's what the reinsurers use to calibrate the options and pricing they're prepared to offer. And that's why the accuracy and consistency of data is so important, and why I see that it should form part of it should certainly be aligned to the contract wording.
How was that done when you first joined the ACE team, when you first stepped into the Ceded role? How was the process by which you prepared the information pack? What did that look like at the time?
We had a relatively small division. It was maybe half a dozen people. But we had the help of some very, very professional reinsurance brokers.
Sure.
And I suppose, you can think about a big company like ACE. My job was to write off to the various stakeholders of whatever lines of business it would be. But, the bigger lines, the property lines or the casualty lines, you're writing to line managers literally around the world. And you're pulling together data and information, bordereau risk profiles, loss history, rating changes from all these disparate areas. And sometimes it would come back in different formats. ACE might have bought a company in Latin America or a new company in Europe. It would have a different legacy system. So there was no consistency with which, this information was coming back. And we relied very heavily on the broking community, our brokers, appointed brokers, to what they call cleanse data, pull it together and put it into a format that our reinsurers could make sense of.
Yeah, and I think even after sort of decades-long digitization efforts, the industry still has a lot of these problems that they wrestle with, right?
Yeah.
These big companies, and you talked about Ace then being acquired by the Chubb group, but like these acquisitions continue to happen, and every time they do, it compounds this sort of data challenge that all these organizations wrestle with. So I think you would still wrestle with the same problem had you taken that role today for the first time.
Yeah, look, I mean, it was a while ago now I left Ace, and things may, I'm sure, have improved dramatically. But yeah,
no more fax machines though, so good,
Yeah.
good progress there.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, that's right. I remember. When I first started, of course, there weren't any computers. We had to share a calculator, a bunch of 4 brokers, and staplers. Everything was shared. Didn't have mobile phones or LinkedIn or podcasts or anything like that. Yeah, it was very, very different. And that's what's changed. And I think the skill sets have changed dramatically in the 40 years I've been in this business. I mean, when I first came into the business, I think the skill set was, can you communicate? Are you a team player? Your manners appropriate? Come and join us. Whereas now it's a very much more professional time, and the millennial generation, the Gen Z generation, are so good at managing technology and understanding technology. And I'm in awe of you young guys who do it. I really am. I mean, what would take me a day to do a basic PowerPoint presentation would take my kids like half an hour, and people we work with, Jared and Ben, And I think to myself, what's the appropriate use of my time? I'd love to be able to do it.
Yeah.
But if someone can do it far better than me, let them do it. My dad always said, let the carpenter do the woodwork. Yeah. Mind you, if you've seen his DIY attempts, you'd understand why he said that. But I think, I think, where were we?
No, I agree with you, because actually I was having a really similar conversation with a relatively senior Ceded Re team member the other day, and I think I don't think it should be seen as a confession, but they came forward as well very straightforwardly and said, look, I've grown up not with all this software, and now I've got a team of people who are telling me they want software to make their jobs easier, but we've only ever done it this way.
Yeah.
Where do we start? How do I, as the boss of this team, who doesn't understand software necessarily, get the right software in for my Ceded Re team, which is now mostly Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z even. I think that is a really big challenge for very experienced reinsurance professionals who've been in the industry, have all the relationships, have all the extremely detailed knowledge about how everything should work, how contracts should read, how programs should be structured and put together. But translating that into software, there is a knowledge gap at the moment. Would you agree? Or?
Yes, I would. And I think it's one of those things, we understand how the market works, how the reinsurance market, the different stakeholders, the players, pricing, what the roles that pricing actuaries have, the roles that cap modelers have, the roles that legal counsel have in drafting reinsurance contracts, the roles that security teams have in making sure that we only cede our exposures to the most robust counterparties. All these things, I was a small cog in a very well-oiled machine, and I had these professionals, people around me, and that was part of the whole risk management process. And it was, it was very successfully done. I have great confidence. People say to me, do you ever lie awake at night worrying about things? And I hope I'm not sounding complacent. I don't think I did, really. I think, we'd gone through the process very, very professionally from start to finish. We'd considered all the options, We've even sort of, I remember, do you remember the Donald Rumsfeld quote? We know the known knowns, then the known unknowns, and the unknown unknowns. I mean, you felt that you'd covered every eventuality, and that when you finally placed the programs, you've done your best. And but of course, it's, as I said at the start, it's only reinsurance is a promise to pay, and the time that yet really comes into play is when you put in the claim, and that is why the transparency and accuracy of information and is so important.
Well, I think you sort of touched on. I think what we're seeing now is this shift where the leadership teams are empowered or giving power to the people who are doing the work to find ways for them to have confidence in that work. When you were sort of doing the job, it was handing the information or handing those sort of unstructured, uncleansed data, as you put it, to the broking team and then getting back the information. Because in your role and in the role of a senior reinsurance buyer, you're at the point where you want answers to your questions. You want to understand at a high level, tell me these pieces of information. But you're less concerned about how that information is captured, as long as you are confident in the quality of that data. We made a comparison the other day, earlier this week, to like Google, for example. You don't want to go to a website to figure something out. You want an answer to the question you're searching for. And I think in a lot of ways, the senior leadership team of reinsurance buyers is doing that same thing. They want to know, what does this book look like at a high level? What is the development of this portfolio? But they're giving their colleagues who are actually doing that work a bit more autonomy to find the tools that make it easiest for them. Right? I could ask Ben a question and he might go down to the local library and comb through journals to find the answer. It wouldn't be the most effective way for him to find the information I'm looking for, but it's an option he has. Yeah. I think the teams that and the engagement we're getting as a business oftentimes is with those team members who are the ones deep in the spreadsheets, doing all of the work, trying to, at the end of their week, present their boss with the information that they're looking for. And I think you're seeing that transition now where that team, that leadership team, is comfortable not being the ones running the technology themselves and are empowering their colleagues to sort of find the best ways for them to present that data and capture that data for them. So that sort of evolution I think you're seeing there is something that's helping drive the adoption of technology in our space, which is a really exciting space, I think, especially for younger entrants and younger colleagues in the industry.
I think you pointed towards the sort of concept of professionalization as well, but I think it's one of those challenging. I think there's a very good philosopher's expression that I've almost certainly forgotten, which describes almost similar to the pushing a rock up a hill and it rolling back down again narrative. Name your Greek mythological characters if you can. But anyway, with us getting better as data providers, the demands only go up, right? Every time you provide a reinsurer with an extra exhibit or a bit more color on a portfolio, they say, "Oh, can you show me like that then?" Or question, "What's inside that extra piece you've just shown me?" I think that's began to culminate, I guess, in an ever increased standard for the market in terms of what is expected, to the point where we've been talking to Cedents recently. In a year where 33 out of 37 central banks around the world have raised interest rates in the last year, to start adjusting for massive economic factors by the month. Suddenly it's like, oh yes, thank you very much for the submission pack you've spent the last 3 months preparing, but actually, could you adjust everything for these different inflation targets by region, because they've all moved since we last spoke? Oh, I mean, thank goodness that the whole Trussonomics sort of issues didn't happen right around renewal season, right? Could you imagine what extra turmoil the market would have been in if we were only seeing the UK economy about to sort of fall to pieces right around the time that hurricanes were landing and so on? So the demands on teams now are so much so, I think, that you've got to leave the experts to sort of tell you what they need in order to answer these very difficult questions, I guess. But,
I mean, data, I've always think data on its own is fairly meaningless. But in a structured, a structured form, it becomes meaningful information. Yeah. And when you think about, and it's that information that determines the options and structures of a reinsurance program, or the pricing reinsurers are going to charge. So the data is becoming more and more relevant, and the granularity of the data is becoming more and more relevant.
Well, I think there's a phrase that Ben and I got painfully used to when we were consulting, but which is just so what, right? If you can provide the data with this additional lens, it's like, so what? Like, you need to have a reason or purpose for doing so. And I think what we're getting now, especially with the reinsurance space, is actually the so what means I can carve this part of the treaty into something else, a per risk or a different sort of structure for that element of it, or I can group these things together, or I can choose to retain this because I have better clarity as to the performance of this particular thing. But that ability to interrogate the data and have it in a more structured and in a format you can drill into more deeply allows you to sort of understand and explore it in a way that you can make actionable, assessments on that data that might determine how you buy, what you buy, etc. So it becomes a really powerful tool in the hands of a Ceded Re team as they explore what they want to do for their purchase.
I think it's interesting when you talked about your past career, and the reliance you placed on the reinsurance brokers to prepare a lot of the submission exhibits from all the raw materials almost that you'd been able to source from the many different operating entities around the world. I think that model worked for a long time, but in part because of the demands that have continued to ramp up over time. Now it seems to be almost all that reinsurance brokers do. And I don't think that's what Ceded Re teams necessarily want to be the only thing that they do. We've heard anecdotally over the past couple of renewal seasons, brokers going back to their clients and saying, look, this data prep is going to take us so long that we don't think we've really got time to play around with any alternative structures. It's kind of as expiring because that's what the markets are used to. They're only going to have a week or two to look at it anyway. We're not at the top of their pile necessarily, so they're not going to make a special effort to pick through all of our data and try out something that they can't compare to last year. And what I really hope we can get to is a market where we get back to a partnership spirit where the data's already done. By the time the cedent talks with their broker about what they want to protect, by the time the broker goes out to the reinsurers and figures out, what's a really good structure we can come up with together to accommodate what you want and what the cedent wants. That's, I think, what's missing at the moment in a market just completely consumed by manual data work, and something that I think we need to kind of help out in helping people to understand that getting software into their organizations to do that data work for them is a lot easier than they might think.
Yeah, I think one of the dreams there being one where the broker and the cedent are sitting down and looking at a data set and going, well, what if we did this, and being able to get those answers on a call together versus I'll come back to you in 3 weeks and we will discuss that idea then, right? Being able to sort of move towards this deeply collaborative process, because I think it's where that relationship wants to go and will inevitably go, but we're chipping away at the process involved.
I mean, there's no doubt that data cleansing part of the process is a huge value add that the reinsurance brokers provide. But it doesn't matter whether they cleanse the data or the cedent cleanses the data. Ultimately, the cedent has to sign that information and that data back off before it goes out to the reinsurance market. Personally, I would rather, as a cedent, be in total control of my data and totally happy that it has been prepared and cleansed and delivered through our own systems. I think it's, as I say, it all boils back to utmost good faith and the duty of disclosure and being able to present information in the most accurate possible way. Yeah, that's what I would advocate 100%. I would much rather, as a cedent, have a system, one of the sort of system we talk about at Supercede, that I think is extraordinarily exciting for the market. It'll bring huge efficiencies to many aspects, not just the Ceded Re areas, but portfolio optimization or internal audits, or
Well, you talked earlier about the importance of transparency, and I think in our position on that is it starts with the cedent, but if the cedent has clarity on that data and they can pass that transparent and clarity of data to the brokers can do more with it, as you point out. But then when it gets to the reinsurer, they too benefit from going, oh, this all makes sense. It all seems to be here. Like that can sort of flow right the way through the chain. And but the harder it is to get that in a good spot early on, the more opaque it gets throughout the chain. The broker touches it, it gets a bit more opaque. So the reinsurer gets it, and they're really left kind of muddling through what they have. But if we can make it where it's clear the whole way through, more transparent the whole way through, it becomes a really powerful and valuable asset in the market.
Fabulous. Just saying one word because we spoke earlier of signing off, and Cordy has been waving his arms at me in a frantic manner to suggest that we're over time, which is a shame. But those of you who have been playing the Greek mythology quiz in the background, it was Sisyphus, I'm pretty sure, unless I've got it completely wrong, in which case I apologize.
I had a guess, but it wasn't that, so we'll have to come back with the answer on that.
But Paul, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. Any final words of wisdom to share with our listeners before we say goodbye?
Well, I think for those listening, I would just say I don't know if when this podcast is being aired, but we're a few days before Christmas here in the UK. I want to wish everybody a happy Christmas and a profitable new year. It's going to be a tough renewal. It is a tough renewal for many people in the industry. But I suppose the advice would be keep calm and carry on.
Indeed.
Fabulous.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for having us. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.